Will the United States walk away from the talks with China this week, holding a concrete agreement on anything? Here to give us an insider's view is the former U.S. ambassador to China and former U.S. Senator from Tennessee, James Sasser. He joins us now from our bureau in Washington. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Bottom Line. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Sir, are you expecting anything substantive to come out of the talks over the next 2 days? Are both sides making a good faith effort to work together effectively?
I think there's a good faith effort being made to work together. But as far as anything solid coming out of this session, I doubt it very seriously. There's a term in the diplomatic world called deliverables. I don't expect many deliverables to come out of this particular session. But I think it is worthwhile. And there will be extensive discussions, I think, on the currency issue, on the Chinese demands about indigenous innovation that they're placing on Western companies from the European Union and the United States, and also discussions in the diplomatic and security areas.
Sir, China wants assurances that its $1.2 trillion in U.S. Treasury holdings is safe. Given the heated debate in Congress over whether the debt ceiling should be raised, can Washington give Beijing the assurance that it wants?
I think so. The Secretary of the Treasury will be, I think, pretty solid in saying that don't worry about your bonds, that the United States is going to be safe and solvent for a long time in the future. And I don't think the Chinese are particularly concerned about our debt ceiling. I think they are concerned about our overall long-range budget problems. And they've indicated that on a number of times, and also indicated that maybe they might be interested in moving away from the dollar as the world standard currency. They talk in terms of a market basket of currencies, et cetera, et cetera. But I think as of now, their U.S. Treasury bonds are safe and sound, and they know it.
Mr. Ambassador, is that talk that you mentioned of moving away from the dollar, is that talk that's picking up steam, or is it just something that's being whispered in Beijing?
Well, it's being talked in Beijing. Part of it, I think, is a result of the thought that an overreaction, really, to the economic distress here in the U.S. coming out of the financial collapse, and also economic distress in Europe with their problems with the euro. But overall, I don't see any real Chinese push to try to change the world currency situation. Right. They really don't have the economic strength to do that, or the will, and it's not in their interest.
Well, Washington continues to charge that the Chinese are keeping their currency, the yuan, artificially low. The U.S. wants China to speed up efforts to revalue the currency. Will the Chinese comply, and what impact does an undervalued yuan have on U.S. manufacturers?
Well, number one, an undervalued Chinese currency, I think it cheapens Chinese exports coming into the United States and makes our exports to China probably less competitive. We have been putting the pressure on the Chinese for some time to up the value of their currency. We're sort of the spearhead of that, but the Western Europeans also want the Chinese to revalue their currency upwards. And what we've seen is a gradual, very slow trend upward. But we've got a long way to go, and I don't think we're going to make much progress with the Chinese on that issue in these talks.
Well, last year, America's trade deficit with China was a record $273 billion, 20% higher than it was in '09. Should the U.S. file new trade cases against China?
Well, we've already filed some trade cases. I expect there will be others that will be filed, but that's not really the problem. The problem is that we simply have a great hunger for these cheap Chinese exports to the U.S.
Right.
Now, the Chinese will say, well, you know, the United States is doubling its exports to China, but it comes from a very low base as far as U.S. exports are concerned. And so I don't, the real problem is with with U.S. consumers and U.S. importers, not so much with the Chinese.
Mr. Ambassador, I have a little less than a minute left. Human rights, it's always been a sensitive issue between the U.S. and China, even when you were the ambassador. At the start of today's talks, Vice President Biden, Secretary of State Clinton, they expressed concerns about recent security crackdowns in China in the wake of those civil uprisings in the Middle East. How are the Chinese going to respond to this talk, and has China made progress in the area of human rights, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think they've made some progress in the area of human rights, but it's slow, and actually there have been some steps backward recently. And I think the Chinese are reacting really to what they've seen in the Middle East in the so-called Arab Spring. They're worried about the same sort of, as they see it, democratic virus spreading to China. So there has been some backward movement recently. But I think they're going to paddle their own canoe on that and not going to be unduly, as they see it, influenced by what the United States says on the issue of human rights today.
The former U.S. Ambassador to China, James Sasser, joining us from Washington. Mr. Ambassador, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.